Lieutenant Igor Streltsov lay on the snow-covered ground, gripping his assault rifle tightly. Hot blood trickled down his temple, staining his face and camouflage collar. A thick fog, mixed with a gunpowder haze, concealed everything around him. Only occasionally did the vague silhouettes of his comrades emerge. 3 of the 6 men in his group were already dead. "Hold on, must hold on," he repeated to himself, trying to load a new magazine with fingers numbed by cold and fear. The KGB Special Forces Squad had walked into an ambush in the mountains of the northern Caucasus. Militants had pinned them down at a narrow mountain pass and were methodically eliminating them one by one. The commander had fallen in the first minutes of battle, leaving Streltsov in charge. "Streltsov, cover me," rasped Sergeant Klimov from somewhere to the right. Igor jerked upward and fired a long burst toward the enemy. The dry crack of his rifle momentarily drowned out all other sounds: the whistle of bullets, the groans of the wounded, the clipped commands of the militants. Streltsov pressed the trigger until the magazine was empty, then dropped back to the ground, pressing his cheek against the frozen crust. Meanwhile, Klimov was trying to contact headquarters, but the mountains were jamming the radio signal. It was at that moment that Streltsov saw something strange through the gray veil of fog. A dark figure was approaching them. It wasn't crouching under the bullets, wasn't seeking cover. It simply walked forward, confidently, steadily, as if on a stroll in the park. "Klimov, on the right," Igor shouted, swinging his rifle toward the stranger. The sergeant didn't answer. His lifeless body was already lying nearby, wide-open eyes staring at the gray sky. A half-smile was frozen on his lips, strangely at odds with the crimson trickle running down his chin. The figure drew closer. Now Streltsov could see it more clearly. A tall man in a formal black coat and a peaked cap with a red star. In his hands he held a P-Piche, an old army submachine gun from the Great Patriotic War, with its characteristic round drum magazine. Igor fired, once, twice, 3 times. The man didn't slow his pace. The bullets passed through him without leaving traces, as if he were woven from smoke. "Shoot more accurately, Lieutenant," the stranger said calmly, stopping beside him. His voice sounded strange, muffled, as if coming from far away, yet perfectly clear. "Or save your ammunition. You'll need it yet." He raised his PPS and opened fire on the militants' positions. The submachine gun rattled, spitting deadly lead into the fog. One by one the enemies fell, their death cries dissolving in the mountain air, echoing across the surrounding slopes. And then came silence, so deep that it seemed as if the mountains themselves were holding their breath. "Get up, Lieutenant." The man extended his hand. "Colonel Derzhavin, and I have something to discuss with you." At headquarters it was warm, even hot after the frost. Lieutenant Streltsov sat across from Derzhavin, not feeling the familiar pain in his frost-bitten fingers, only numbness. He still didn't understand what had happened in the mountains. How could one man with outdated weapons destroy an entire squad of militants? And why had his own bullets caused the colonel no harm? "You performed well, Lieutenant." Derzhavin lit a cigarette, releasing bluish smoke rings that lazily floated toward the ceiling. "I've been observing you for the past 6 months, since that incident in Grozny." Streltsov instinctively tensed. He had never told anyone about what happened in Grozny. Even in the official report, the events were presented quite differently. "You saw something you weren't supposed to see," the colonel continued, closely watching his interlocutor's reaction. "And, more importantly, you survived afterward. That's a rarity, you know." "What do you mean, Comrade Colonel?" Igor tried to keep his voice steady, but a betraying hoarseness still revealed his agitation. "About that creature you shot in the basement of the destroyed house." Derzhavin took a drag, paused, and exhaled a stream of smoke. "It wasn't human, was it?" Igor felt a chill run down his spine, as if someone had traced an icy finger along his vertebrae. Before his eyes again flashed the image, the dark basement, Strange symbols on the walls drawn either with paint or blood, and something. A creature only remotely resembling a human, with unnaturally long limbs and eyes glowing with a greenish fire in the darkness. I don't understand what you're talking about, he began, but his voice treacherously wavered. Come now, Streltsov. Derzhavin grimaced and waved his hand as if shooing away a fly. There's no point in denying it. I'm offering you a transfer. To my department. What department? Igor leaned forward. A special one. The colonel looked at him with unexpected seriousness. Created to combat threats that most people don't even suspect exist, and which officially don't exist. Threats? Streltsov frowned, trying to understand where his interlocutor was going. Supernatural forces, Lieutenant. Derzhavin lowered his voice, although they were alone in the office. What ordinary people call ghosts, demons, monsters, things that penetrate our world from the outside and try to change the order of things. A heavy silence hung in the office. Igor looked at his hands, trying to process what he'd heard. At first, he thought that the colonel was simply testing his mental stability using some strange methods. But then he remembered that incident in Grozny again. The creature he had shot was definitely not human. And the way it moved, how it looked at him with those glowing eyes, how it hissed in an incomprehensible language. This is nonsense, Streltsov finally said, not raising his gaze. Perhaps, Derzhavin unexpectedly agreed. But you've seen it yourself, Lieutenant. There is something beyond the boundaries of our understanding, and someone must protect people from it. He stubbed out his cigarette in a heavy crystal ashtray. That's our job. Streltsov slowly raised his eyes, meeting the colonel's gaze. Why me? Because you have a gift. Derzhavin didn't avert his gaze. You can see what's hidden from ordinary people, and you had enough strength of spirit not to go mad from what you saw. There aren't many like you. The colonel unhurriedly stood up and approached the window. Beyond the glass stretched evening Moscow, its lights slightly muted by the falling snow. I'm not demanding an immediate answer, he said without turning around. Think about it, but consider this. If you refuse, you'll have to forget everything you've seen. And I'm not talking about simply signing a non-disclosure agreement. There was an undisguised threat in his voice, but Igor understood that he had no choice. He had already seen too much. I agree, he said curtly, standing up. The colonel turned and smiled, for the first time in the entire conversation. This smile didn't reach his eyes, which remained serious and somewhat sad. The right decision, Lieutenant. Tomorrow you'll be met at the eastern entrance to the Lubyanka, at 900 hours. Derzhavin paused. And yes, prepare yourself for the fact that your life will change forever. The KGB Special Department's base for combating the supernatural was located deep underground, in a labyrinth of tunnels left over from the construction of the Moscow metro in the 1930s. Streltsov was accompanied by a taciturn major who had met him at the entrance to the Lubyanka. The escort's face seemed vaguely familiar to Igor, but he couldn't recall where he might have seen him. They descended in an elevator, an old one with latticed doors and a creaky cabin, then walked for a long time through dimly lit corridors where sparse lamps cast bizarre shadows on the walls. Finally, they stood before a massive steel door resembling the entrance to a bank vault. The major placed his palm on a scanner embedded in the wall. The device softly illuminated, reading his fingerprint, and a second later, the door silently slid aside. Welcome to Department 13, Lieutenant. Before them opened a spacious hall with a high ceiling supported by massive columns. Several dozen people in military uniforms and civilian clothes worked at computers, studied maps and documents, moved between tables. In the center of the hall was a large round table with a three-dimensional holographic map of the USSR, around which a group of officers had gathered, animatedly arguing about something. Impressive, Igor murmured, looking around. This is just the beginning. replied the major, leading him through the hall. "The colonel is waiting in his office." Streltsov noticed that many employees were examining him with interest. Some nodded in greeting, others whispered among themselves, casting quick glances at him. The sensation was strange, as if they all already knew something important about him that he himself didn't know. Derzhavin's office was at the far end of the hall, behind a glass partition that allowed the colonel to observe the department's work. Derzhavin himself sat at a desk, studying some documents by the light of a desk lamp. Next to him stood a young woman in a white laboratory coat, blonde, with sharp features and a cold, appraising gaze. "Ah, Streltsov!" Derzhavin stood up, greeting those who entered. "Thank you, Major, you're dismissed." The escort nodded and silently exited, closing the door behind him. "Meet Dr. Kovaleva. She's responsible for our special employees." The woman nodded coldly, closely examining Igor as if he were an experimental specimen. "Are you ready for the procedure, Lieutenant?" "What procedure?" Igor asked warily, feeling everything tighten inside him. "Every fighter in our department works in pairs," explained Derzhavin, circling the desk. "And your partner will be special. He will come from beyond the boundary, from the supernatural world." "You mean to say—" Streltsov faltered, not believing his ears. "Yes, Lieutenant." The colonel placed a hand on his shoulder. "Your partner will be what ordinary people call a demon. But don't worry, he'll be completely under your control." He paused and added a bit more quietly, "or almost completely." Meanwhile, Dr. Kovaleva had taken a small device from her coat pocket, somewhat resembling an injection gun, only of a more complex construction. "This won't hurt," she said, approaching Igor. "Just a necessary procedure before the summoning." "Wait," Streltsov instinctively stepped back. "I didn't consent to—" "You already agreed, Lieutenant?" Derzhavin interrupted him, and steel notes again appeared in his voice. "When you accepted my offer, and now there's no way back." Kovaleva seized the moment and with a quick movement pressed the device to Streltsov's neck. There was a quiet hiss, and Igor felt a sting like from a wasp's stinger. "What did you inject me with?" he mumbled, feeling a strange warmth spreading through his body, starting from the injection site and flowing through his veins. "Nothing dangerous," smiled Kovaleva, and there wasn't a drop of warmth in that smile. "Just a small modification to your soul. Now you'll be able to share it." "Share? My soul?" Streltsov looked at her with bewilderment. "Exactly," nodded Derzhavin. "That's the currency of the supernatural world and payment for the services of your future partner." Kovaleva took Igor by the elbow and led him to a strange circle on the floor, made of metal that was darker and more matte than steel. Inside the circle were etched complex symbols and runes, somewhat reminiscent of those that Streltsov had seen in the basement in Grozny. "Stand in the center," she said, gently pushing him, "and get ready. The first contact can be unpleasant." Igor did as he was told, still not fully understanding what was happening. The warmth in his body intensified, turning into heat, rising from his stomach to his chest and head. Colored spots floated before his eyes, first red, then green, then all the colors of the rainbow. Kovaleva stepped back several paces and began to chant in an unknown language, guttural, with unusual sounds and abrupt stops. The symbols on the floor glowed with blue light, pulsing in time with the doctor's strange speech. The air in the circle thickened, became almost tangible, as if Igor had been immersed in invisible jelly. And then Streltsov saw it. The creature materialized from darkness right in front of him, as if someone had gathered all the shadows in the room into one. It was tall, thin, with disproportionately long arms and legs. Its body appeared black as absolute emptiness, absorbing light, but its eyes glowed with an amber light, resembling molten gold. They looked directly at Igor, studying, assessing, penetrating deeper than anyone had ever looked. "This is Merak," said Derzhavin. "From now on, he's your partner, and part of your soul belongs to him." The creature tilted its head to the side, continuing to examine Streltsov. There was something bird-like, predatorily graceful in this gesture. "I see you, human," it spoke in a voice that seemed to sound directly in Igor's head, bypassing his ears. The voice was deep, vibrating, as if something very ancient and very powerful was speaking. "I see your fears, your desires, I see your soul. It's interesting, rare. I will serve you, for the right price." Streltsov felt something detaching from him, going into the void, as if part of himself, invisible but no less real for that, had been torn away and transferred to the creature. For a moment, it seemed to him that he could see a thin thread of light stretched between him and Merak, connecting them. "The first payment is accepted," said Merak with cold satisfaction. "For each assistance there will be a new price. Remember this, human." And at that moment, Streltsov understood that his life had indeed changed forever. Now he was bound to a creature from another world, and this bond would cost him far more than he could imagine.